I remember like driving down that road for the last time, and it was like the most freeing feeling. It was like I understood what Viktor Frankl was talking about when he said the hardest part is not knowing when you're going home, and like that best feeling is knowing that you're done. And it was like I could finally feel what freedom felt like.
Of many cries, we are far from the ashes. Rise up, break the cage, be the lion, be the storm, be the strike of the lightning. Rise with the dawn.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 5 of From Scratch, the podcast where I am walking you through my life story, spending 4.5 years in a Panamanian prison, which actually today, drumroll please, we have finally come to the point where I am in prison for the first time. And, you know, I was reflecting on this time of my life this morning, and a couple things came up for me. And one of them was, you know, people used to ask me when I was in prison, like, how do you feel? I would always say to them, you don't know what freedom feels like until it's gone. And you can adapt to anything in life. Anything. I don't care what it is. People used to say to me, I could never make it in prison. I said, yes, you absolutely can. The body and the mind and the soul that was created by God has been made in such a complex and beautiful way that your body really can adapt to everything. The hardest part for me walking into prison was not knowing when I would be leaving. And I sort of invite you to think about that today. Like, really put yourself in my shoes of like, how would you feel if you lost your freedom? You know, look around and sort of think like, if you could no longer be in this home that you're in, if the friends that you love you couldn't see, if the next 5 Christmases you weren't going to be with your family, if you were suddenly put in a place where you didn't know the language, the culture, the surroundings, how would you feel? And I invite you to put yourself in my shoes, because when it comes to talking about this time in my life, it's A, not easy, and B, to be able to condense everything into such a short amount of time is going to be really, really hard. But I want you to understand something, that I believe that this is one of the hardest situations that people could ever go through. And to date, it was the toughest thing that I've ever had to go through. So, you know, I remember the moment that I stepped out of the back of the truck that I was sitting in, going down this long dirt road. And as you all know, ankle shackled, wrist shackled, going through my mind, wondering what's about to happen to me. And I remember the second that I walked and they brought me down and I was doing my intake, it just kept going through my mind like, what the did I do? What did I do? What did I get myself into? How am I going to get out of this? And everything was new, right? The smells, the sights. And I couldn't anticipate what was to come. I could only feed off of the visuals that my mind was creating, which obviously were horrible, right? It's typically what we do in our lives. We create fear that 98% of that never comes true. It was the same thing for me. So to give you a really quick visual, the prison that I was in was called Llano Marin. And it was in a place called Peñonome, Panama. And in the middle of kind of nowhere, in the middle of a field. And it was nothing like what you typically would see a prison to be, let's say in North America, or even in the UK. This was basically like walking into the ghetto in Central America and having to create a life out of not much. It was a prison that was like half indoors, half outdoors. You know, I always tell people the day that I walked in, there was 28 women. The day that I walked out, there was 110. And I remember one of the first things they told me is there are laws until you reach the front gates of prison. And after that, there are no rules. So come with me while we walk through what prison was like. I remember the first day that I walked in, as I said to you, I was just like, what the fuck is going on? And I have this visual in my head. And I always like to tell people this beginning part because it's really important to understand the culture and the vibe of the prison that I walked into. And I remember I stepped down and I could see all of these women outside in this caged area outside. And they were all in like short shorts, pink t-shirts. There was salsa music playing. Like it was the complete opposite of what I thought I was getting into. Getting their hair done, blow dried. There's women with like huge curlers in their hair and mayas. And then I remember looking over and seeing these two girls that you could just tell that they were sort of like had a bit more authority. And they were standing off to the side. And I remember the one girl yelling at me, "My friend, I love you forever." And that was the only English that she knew. But it was just as much scary as it was humbling. And I saw like that it was still this sort of like feminine thing. Like women still cared about what they looked like. And that was probably one of the first lessons. It was like you walk into prison and it doesn't mean that you just give up. So I was still shackled at this time. The prison was really small. It was split into two sections. So there were basically two wings. And then there was like a solitary confinement cell and like a preliminary cell. I was put in solitary confinement for 45 days, which was basically just cement panels coming out of a wall where, you know, it was infested with huge cockroaches, scorpions, ants of every size. You know, the toilet, you could only flush it by pouring water into it, which overflowed all the time. So I constantly had to clean up feces of my own on the ground. You know, I had no colchon, like no mattress, no blanket. I, you know, got in there and it wasn't like it is in Canada, I guess, where, you know, you get supplies, you get your sweatsuit, your uniform, you know, you get dish soap and laundry soap and toilet paper. I didn't get any of that. So I just had to sort of make do. And when you're in a place where everything is new, you're sort of like, I remember just sort of feeling really numb. And those first months were a real blur to me. And I had to learn the lay of the land really quickly. So I was put in this solitary confinement cell where I was washing my body with laundry soap for 2 weeks. You know, I got my period. I had no feminine products. At times I didn't have toilet paper. The first night I slept on the cement block, and I remember that was one of the only times that I could see the moon, because after that I didn't see the moon for over 3 years. And the sounds, the echoing, the radio, girls yelling, the sounds of fans. It smelled like rotten food. The first time that I ate, which was the same day that I got there, they brought me the food in a plastic container. So I had to get used to, now for the next 4.5 years, I would be eating out of a plastic container, like a yogurt container with a plastic fork. You know, there was definitely people of authority. You know, there were gang members. You know, the first fight that I ever saw was two girls that were dating each other, you know, just beating the shit out of each other in a corner. And it was a lot. Like, if you're a mother, you're going to relate to this. Or if you're someone that has suffered with anxiety, like when you feel the tigers and you just feel like you're always on guard. That is how I felt for a very long time. Now, I want to help you to understand something. As much as this was really, really hard, I tell people this every day. I had really good days in prison, as much as I had really bad days. And what I mean by that is that someone like me, who I made a mistake. I was super selfish at that time of my life. Like, I am nowhere near perfect. I have a tough character. I can get upset, but I also have a good heart. I can be funny. I love to make people laugh. There were people like that in prison. 98% of the women that were locked up in prison with me were there for drug offenses. So they were mothers, they were grandmothers, they were sisters, they were humans. And there was a camaraderie and there was this feeling of unity, even when there was separation. But there was this feeling of unity that was taught right away when I got there. That basically was like, when it comes to the prison, and our rights, we all come together. When it comes to problems inside of the prison, there'll definitely be rivals. So that's how it was from the very beginning. When I got there, I did not understand a word of English, a word of Spanish, nothing. And I say this all the time. I had a very quick decision to make of whether I was going to be constructive or destructive with my time. And I made a decision very, very quickly that I wanted to make the best of the time that I had there, because I was going to lose the time. I certainly wasn't going to waste it. But it was really scary. And so my body had to learn how to adapt to a new language, food that I had, never eaten before, like chicken necks, like pigtails, like chicken foot, rotten beans, bread and American cheese for breakfast and corn coffee for breakfast for the next 4.5 years. There were a lot of adjustments. But the thing that was going to pull me down was if I didn't give in to what needed to be adjusted to. It's really, really easy for us to push against things that we need to adapt to because we are no longer in control of the outcome, and we don't want to accept it because it's not something that we would typically accept in our lives. I learned very quickly that if I wanted to be able to survive in a place where I had no control over anything, the time I woke up, the time I went to the bathroom, the time I showered, that I had to make a decision to, let go and let God. And so from the very beginning, they asked me, like, what is it that we can do? I have to say they were very accommodating. It's sort of like a very different culture. You could kind of do whatever you wanted every single day, all day. In the beginnings, every once in a while, they would let the girls cook outside in these like giant Dutchie pots. And make soup, and we would come together and have these meals together. It was just so interesting. The every day to day in prison, which was, get up, have your coffee, have breakfast. Then there would be time to sort of like get ready. Girls would get ready, go out to work, or they would go to a course, or they would go into the back area of prison and just hang out. And then typically in the afternoon, there would be sort of this lull in energy. So everyone would come together and have coffee. And then 4:30 was lockdown every single day. And you were locked down until 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. In every single cell, there were no showers. There was only one toilet. And in some of the cells, even the day that I left, there were, 40, 50 women to a cell. For me, the most that there was at any time was 22. 22 women to one toilet is never fun. So there was a lot of adjusting that I needed to do. I used fitness very quickly as a way to clear my mind. And one of the first things that I was gifted, which I am going to talk about today, was the Bible. Now, I was just having a conversation about this with someone that, watching the way that God had his hand in my life, the entire way that I went through my entire journey was really amazing. And I want to say something that's really, really important. I went to prison because of a decision that I made. I am responsible for that. But I believe that I am so tough-headed, kind of egotistical, I guess, at times, and rebellious more than anything, that God allowed for this to happen because I believe if I think about where I was at in my life and where I would probably be now to where this situation has now led me, prison saved my life. And God allowed that to happen because I think that God knew that that would be the only thing that saved my life. And so sometimes when we're thinking about our lives and what has happened to us, it's really easy to get discouraged and to blame and to not take responsibility for the decisions that we made. But sometimes in hindsight, when you take a step back and you look at it from a different perspective, or later on in life, you go, that was exactly what needed to happen. So prison was exactly what needed to happen for me in order to change. And I knew that pretty quickly. So I made a decision to get really involved with the prison right away. And so I wanted to do everything. Any course that came, I did it. Every time church came, I did it. Every time there was school, we would do activities. It was sort of like being in high school. If I'm honest with you, I would get involved because it did a couple things for me. One, my father said something to me when I first got in there. Don't waste the time. Make sure you're doing something every single day that pushes you forward. So I would do that. B, in prison, you're always looking for something to take your mind off of the obvious, which is the time that you're serving. And so every time I was able to listen to the word of God, learn about something, plumbing, electricity, cooking, baking, hairdressing, manicures, pedicures, makeup, everything. I can can vegetables like nobody's business. I got involved because it was a great way for me to get through the day. In terms of getting through the day, my life became fragmented to moment by moment. And I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but one of the best books that I ever read in prison was Man's Search for Meaning, and by Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl talks about in his book that the hardest part for him, he was 3 years in a concentration camp, watched his entire family get murdered. And he said, the hardest thing was not knowing when I was going to go home. And so he would create these sort of physical, tangible goals that would be able to get him through the fragments of every single day. So I would wake up knowing that I was serving, 4.5 years in prison, which I will get into in a second. But my days became fragmented into how do I break it down so I can just get through the next 24 hours, right? So getting involved was really, really important to me. From the beginning, I was originally facing 12 to 20 years in prison. Now, that is lucky because at the same time that I was arrested, there was a couple women that were in Indonesia that got the same thing as me, and they got the death penalty. I was facing 12 to 20 years. From the very beginning, my dad flew out to see me, was like, you've never seen somebody work so hard to try and get his daughter out of prison. My family came together like nothing you've ever seen. They were like the army. It was insane. They could run a country with what they did and to try and help me. And we got a lawyer really quickly, and, we were able to get to a point. I didn't get sentenced for about 1.5 years, but we were able to get to a point where my sentence was actually 81 months. And I ended up serving 4.5 years. So one thing that I'm really, really good at is maybe disassociating, but I was able to focus on the task at hand, but still get through the emotions. So let's talk about the emotions for a little bit. How does it feel to be in prison? Really fucking hard. Really, really hard. But in life, you're always going to hear, you have to choose your hard. So even though every single day was difficult for me, I would have moments where I would laugh and I would feel happy and excited. And I also knew that I still had to push forward. If you've ever been through that in your life, you still have to find the why to push forward through that, right? And it was sort of like the stages of grief I went through was, starting with shame and then guilt. And I went through all of those stages while still trying to survive and still trying to keep my head afloat. So while all of this is going on with the emotional part of me and me trying to just better myself, I still had to figure out how to survive in prison. Now, Panama is a place where, the culture is completely different from the culture that I grew up in Canada, right? They consider themselves part of the Caribbean. A lot of the women that I was in prison with were lower educated, like badly educated, or they had never been to school before, or they had to drop out of school in order to join a gang or get into the sex trade industry or get into drugs to be able to take care of their families. So these are women that are in fight or flight and survival mode all the time. And I learned a lot from these women. And, these were also women that did not mess around. So I found myself a lot of times like not being able to believe the things that I was going through, right? I remember the first time there was a raid, for instance. You're in a cell, you're laying down, and 80 officers that are fully balaclavaed with drug dogs come in, they're screaming, everybody has to get up. I have no idea what's going on. I don't understand the language. Women are screaming at each other. They take us all outside. We all get strip searched. And we're talking like bend over and cough with 3 officers behind you laughing at you, going through all of your stuff, confiscating everything that you have. It's humiliating. It's absolutely humiliating. And I remember thinking like, this is normal for a lot of these women. They've like grown up in this type of lifestyle, And so women, a lot of times things were dealt with by, fighting. There was a lot of gossip. There were a lot of fights. There was a lot of like groups coming together and then separating, and rivalries, or like working with guards to, go against somebody else. It's a whole other network and life in there. And it took me a little bit to really understand the culture because I didn't speak the language, but it was like very shortly after, like months in, I realized, okay, so you can be in full communication with family here. There's cell phones. So certain girls were working with guards to get cell phones brought into the jail. There were drugs. There were, switchblades, everything you can think of. Girls were drinking on the weekends. People were coming from outside, jumping fences to bring drugs, alcohol, cell phones, all of that. You could get whatever you wanted. So when I talk about this being really its own lifestyle and its own beast in itself, it really was. The other thing that I have to say this because I said in the beginning, I had good days in prison. Something that I really loved about my time in prison was the amount of culture that I was able to be a part of. I basically, in 4.5 years, became a pseudo Panamanian. I learned everything. These were women that were so motherly and loving in so many ways, and they wanted me to learn everything about their culture. And culture is so important in Panama that even in prison, they celebrated everything. Everything. Carnival, Dia de la Negra, like different food days, different cultural days, different religious days. And so these women taught me everything that I know about cooking, about things like tying my hair, killing a chicken, how to cook this, how to do that, how to dance típico. They would do these classes of típico and I would learn how to dance típico. And it was like, while I was behind bars, I was also getting educated on 3 really beautiful things: the culture of Panama, learning how to speak the language of Spanish, and creating a relationship with God. And that for me is something that I will never forget, and I embody it all the time. And it's really special to me. It really connected me with the country. So something that Panama takes really, I would say everyone in Panama is a believer in one way or another. They may not be walking the Christian walk per se, but that was the word. O sea, Dios te ama, Dios es bueno, like God is good, God loves you. Like these were phrases that I heard from everyone all the time after they had gone and switchbladed someone in the corner and knocked them out. And, gang members are talking about how they're going to go jump someone else and someone's in the corner and getting tattooed with a fake tattoo gun. They're like, Dios es bueno. God is so good. Espera la bendición de Dios. Wait for God's blessing. And so something that I also really, really loved about this culture and that really helped me as an escape was every single time that any church came to preach the gospel, I was there. It didn't matter. Catholic, Jehovah's Witness, Christian, it didn't matter to me. I wanted to be, at that time, in the presence of something positive. And you could feel that. These were people that wanted to bring the word of God and help us to still understand that even in the depths of this hell per se, God was still there. And so I talk about this a lot. The very first time I read the Bible front to back was in prison. The very first time I ever learned any worship songs were in prison. So I know all the worship songs that are in Spanish. And I would show up with my Bible. I would sit in the back and they would have chairs set up. And they would always bring what we call a brindis, which is, a lot of the girls would go out because they would bring snacks or they'd bring arroz con pollo, food, drinks, all of that for us. And I think it was a really good way because we were hungry to get us out. And I remember I would just sit and listen. And I think that is one of the most powerful ways that I don't know how to even say this. That was the main way that I learned Spanish. And when I tell you, whether you believe this or not, there were so many inexplainable miracles that happened to me while I was locked up in a Panamanian prison where I deserved the punishment that I got. And I didn't deserve the blessings that I got. It shocked me. And I was talking about this the other day. I went to Catholic church growing up. And for me, it was a lot like, the Baptist church would come and people would be like shaking on the ground and like, the pastor would be coming up and taking them by the head and the girls would be falling on the ground in their pink uniforms. And our uniforms were pink. Sorry, y'all. I forgot to say that. And it was a lot for me. I couldn't really handle it. But I also could understand that these were women that so desperately wanted to feel like connected to God and wanted forgiveness. And like, it made sense at the same time. And I feel like that was where I was able to really, really connect and start to build a personalized, like strong relationship with God. And I remember there was this pastor that came once and he said, I want you every single night to get on your knees and pray. I want you to pray. It's what you need to do. And you need to ask God for forgiveness, not all the time. Ask God for forgiveness, but you need to know that God is there. And so I started investing in my relationship with God, A, because I had the time, and B, because I wanted to. And I just thought, if this is something, I was holding on to anything that gave me a little bit of joy. Exercise, popsicles, good food, good conversations with family when I could talk to them, journaling, reading the Bible, and connecting with God. And so that was a really big focus. Like I had a radio, I would listen to the pastors, and I feel like I got so many amazing words, and I feel like God's presence, even though I didn't deserve it, was there. So much. And even though I still questioned certain things, and even though to this day, like I am by no means like doing what I need to be doing all the time, but God was still there, just like, it's okay, I got you, I love you, I'm here anyways, So I think that really motivated me as well, to get involved. And I felt like there was this one day, I was about halfway through my sentence, and I was starting to really get used to everything by that time. I had a cell phone at that time. I was like a little bit of a gangster, like I'd be hiding it. And, by that time, what is it called? I could understand the language a little bit more. And so I was a little bit more involved in the way the prison dynamic was set up, right? And that's just kind of how it has to go. And I had put myself in a position of leadership from the beginning because I wanted to do that for myself. So I was, teaching fitness and teaching girls about, how to take care of their bodies better and things like that. And that's how I put myself in a position of leadership very quickly. But I remember there was this time that I felt like I was praying, and I felt like I don't know how it happened, but I was like, I think my purpose is like that I need to share my story on stage. Okay, this is a crazy story. I was like, I think my purpose is that I need to share my story on stage. I just felt that. I was like, okay, when I get out of here, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to motivate people. I'm going to teach them like how I got through this situation, because there's a lot of people that have lived through rock bottoms in their lives, yada, yada, yada. At that time, I had a guard that was like a huge bully. She hated me. She was not treating me well. And she would get guards. Like I had a phone at that time. She got like 9 guards one night to come in and like hold me up and take my phone from me while everybody else was on their phone. And she would laugh in my face. She would tell the guards not to let me outside to go work out. And it was just a whole thing, And so this one day I snapped. And I mean, I snapped. Like I didn't fight while I was in prison. I wouldn't let it happen. But I snapped, and she was calling me like, she would call me like la gringa de la verga, esa gringa de la verga. I know that's bad, but she was just like taunting me all the time. And I let it get to me, and I snapped. And I remember she was like walking out, and I charged her, and I wanted to just like grab her hair and pull her back and just start feeding her shots to the face. That's what I wanted to do. And this big girl named Geneva, who's like 350 or 400 pounds, huge, grabbed arms with this other girl, and they were cross-armed, and they were holding me back, but I saw red. She said, I've never seen anything like that with you, Alana. Like you were going to kill this woman. I snapped. And I mean, I snapped. I don't remember. I went after her. I was screaming everything at her, and I got written up. And I got written up for that. And when you get written up in prison, you get an extra 6 months on your sentence. But if you're already in prison, sorry, I should clarify. You get 6 months probation. So if you're on your way out, you may have to stay an extra 6 months. But if you still have time to serve, like I did, you get 6 months of like, you can't have any visitors. Nobody can come and see you. People can't send you food, like none of that. And so we could have that. People could send us food. They could help us, things like that. And I remember this girl pulled me to the side, and she was this girl, Anna Yancey. And she was like, girl, you cannot act like this. Like, you need to change your life. This can't be it. Like, da, da, da. So that was sort of my like coming to Jesus moment, as they like to call it, that my moment of like, okay, I need to change my attitude. And everything after that was really intentional and really purposeful for me, where I was like, you know what? I'm just like everybody here. Everybody here. I am no different. I am no better. I am no worse. And I can understand why this type of environment can get to people and make people do crazy. And I watched it. I watched girls go up on the roofs, cut each other, light things on fire, like get more time, like girls that came in with a 2-year sentence and it's 6 years later and they're still there. I saw it at that moment. Like, this could get to me. This could be the thing that makes me snap. So I made a decision. I was like, no more. I got to figure this out. So I remember, not a word of a lie, it was like 2 days later, I go outside and I see this thing on the wall for this public speaking competition. And I'm like, no way. So it was a public speaking competition. And the way that it worked was that you wrote a speech about a certain topic that they had. You wrote a speech. You would do the speech in front of the prison. So the women's prison, and there was a men's prison across the way. Okay. The men's prison always like did activities with us and things like that. So we would do activities together. So you would do it in front of them, and you would do it in front of the whole university, because sometimes the university would come down and do courses with us. You would do it in front of like all the students. So it'd be like 80 to 100 people. Plus administration. If you won, one man and one woman would go to Panama City, 3 hours away, no handcuffs, in a beautiful amphitheater in Casco Viejo, and it would be on national television. You would write another speech and you would be on national television. So I just knew. I knew. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So I went back in and I started writing a speech, and I had 30 days. I wrote the speech in English, and I was focused, you guys. Hours and hours a day I spent on this. It was amazing. Those 30 days probably went by the fastest any time did in prison. I wrote a speech. I figured out, with people's help, how to translate it into Spanish. The day came where we did it. We performed it. My future baby daddy was actually there when I did it. And I did the speech. I won. I couldn't believe it. I won. And then a month later, my dad flew down. I wrote another speech. I got to go to Panama City with no handcuffs and an entourage of police officers and do another speech, which I didn't win. But let me tell you something that happened to me that day. It was like I listened to what I felt like I was being told. Even though I felt like I couldn't do it, how was I going to write a speech in Spanish? Did it anyways, got on that stage, and it felt like this crazy click for me where I was like, okay, this is my purpose. And the whole vision, everything for me came to fruition that day. And I was like, okay, my purpose is to tell my story, to help women in prison, and to get on stages. And from that day forward, my time in prison was not easier, but it was way more purposeful. So I was practicing. I was writing business plans. I was writing speeches. I was focused on really learning Spanish. And you would relate to this if you know that once you find a purpose, things flow a lot more. So after that time, the rest of my prison stay was still about survival, was still, watching girls smuggle in drugs and fights and, eating bad food. And, I went to the hospital. I was hospitalized. I almost died. Like, all these things were happening, but I knew inside of me that God had put me in prison because he was using me as a vessel to be able to, now I know, glorify him, but then also at the same time help women in prison, because I felt like I was the person that God chose to do that. That was it. The end. The end. And so, the the last year that I was in prison, I fought so hard to get out. It was really tough for me. I lost about 15 to 20 pounds. I kept getting sick because what happened there were these things where the president would pardon people, and twice a year, the president would pardon people. And right when it was my time to get pardoned, there were 2 pardons that happened. And for some weird reason, my name was not on the list. And I couldn't understand. My name did not show up on that list. And then I wrote a letter to the president of Panama at that time, asking for my release. And I got a call from my lawyer at that time, because I switched lawyers twice. I got a call from my lawyer at that time, and she said, "You're going home." No, that's a lie. She showed up to the prison and she said, "Listen, you're going home." And she explained to me, she was like, "I heard from them, you're going home, da da da." They called me into the office, into administration, and they were like, I was so excited, you guys. I was so excited. And I'd been getting court dates to be like, okay, I've been working. Like, how do I reduce my sentence? How do I get out? I want to go home. I'd had enough. And I went into the office and I was like, she was talking to me and I was like, okay, so what about this thing of like me going home? And she was like, yep, you're going home. You're going home. You're going home. And then I found out that was not happening. I don't know what happened. If people lied to me, I'm not sure what happened, but I didn't end up going home. I could not understand why this kept happening. So there was another presidential election after that. A presidential pardon after that. And I still remember the day. They had changed our uniforms because I was a worker. I had a purple t-shirt on. I had jeans on, because that was our uniform. And I remember the paper came in. So it would come out in the newspaper, the names of people that were being released. And it was an automatic release. So your name would come in the paper. You would go inside. You would grab your stuff and you would go home. And this might make me emotional because it was really hard. It'd been like, I might have said a year, but it was at this time, it was like a year and a half that I had been fighting. And I remember the paper came out. And I had good behavior. I had done every course. I had been approached by the government of Panama to do this project of like designing clothes. And I designed an entire line of clothing. I had given back. Like I had done on paper, I had done everything I needed to do to get to the place where they let me go. Paper came out. I grabbed the paper. No, someone else grabbed the paper. And I knew at that moment what had happened because I could just see it on their face. And I was like, give me the paper. And I opened it. And it was this like blue rectangle and it would have all the names. And I'm going through and I'm looking at all the prisons. And we get to Llano Marin. And my name's not there. And I'm like, what is happening? And I remember my body did this weird contortion thing. I couldn't even, it was like another moment of just like panic. I went into the back, the psychologist and this other admin woman like followed me. And I just like, I don't know what I did. I just like went up and I was like crying. I couldn't do anymore. It'd been enough. It'd been 4.5 years of just like absolute hell, but me trying to keep it together and have a positive attitude and just like do it all. Just because you have a positive attitude doesn't mean that crappy things aren't happening in your life. It's choice. And so I remember I left I went back inside. And after that, I was just sort of like, I felt defeated. I kept praying, but I felt defeated. I felt angry. Why do you have me here? I've done everything I need to do. What's going on? So I remember there was this gentleman that had really helped my family a lot. His name is Kim. He's basically become like an uncle to me. And he knew at that time that if I wanted to get out, basically the only way we could do it is we needed to find someone to take responsibility for me. And so him and the father of my son, who was out and who like really helped a lot at this time in my life, they had been asking people up where they lived if they would like be interested in this. And they had spoken to this woman named Sunny Justice, who was this like amazing woman. And they had talked to me about her before, and they talked to her about me. And first thing, she was like, absolutely not. Because the idea was that I was going to go live in her house. Like, she had to take responsibility for me. Then I would live in her house to finish out my sentence. And she was like, absolutely not. No way. I'm not having an ex-con come and live in my house. And fair enough. She had a point. So her story is she's a believer, a little bit of a different believer, but she's a believer. Like, she knows that God exists. And she was praying one day. She had this like meditation room that was beautiful. And she said she was praying, and it was like, you need to bring Alana into your house. Alana needs to come and stay with you. This is a crazy story, you guys. And I remember the night before everything happened, I was on my knees. And like sobbing, just like, God, please get me out of here. Please, whatever I need to do, please, I can't do this anymore. I had like snapped and busted all of the wooden doors in the bathrooms. I snapped, and I was like boxing. I punched through every single one of the doors. All my knuckles were bleeding. They were swollen. I couldn't do it anymore. I was done. And I was like on my knees begging, praying, God, please, I can't do this. Next morning, I go out to make a phone call on the payphone. And I look, and I'm like, wait, Kim? And I see Kim, the guy that I just told you about that helped me, and my lawyer, and this tall woman with white short hair. And I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, and I see the guards come up, and the guard is like so happy for me. And she's like, Alana, come, somebody's here for you. And I was like, okay. So I go inside and I sit down, and Sunny's there, and she gives me this big No, she didn't hug me in the beginning. She shook my hand in the beginning. I sat down, and basically she tells me the story. Kim had approached me. He told me about your story. I said no. 2 months later, 2 months, you guys, she's praying. She feels like God tells her, Alana needs to come and live in your house. She called Kim that day, and the next day they came to the prison. She's like, I needed to come and see if you were crazy or not. I said, well, I am. And she said, what I want. She goes, first of all, I used to work for Vogue. Okay. And I come from the fashion world, and I basically am responsible for, Burt's Bees being what it is today. I also have a 8-bedroom luxury Airbnb in El Valle, and I would like for you to come and help me run it. You can do all the social media. You can build me a website. I'm going to teach you how to be an innkeeper, and you can live with me, and I'm going to teach you everything I know. And I was like, I didn't think this at the time, but it's like, oh, that's the reason why I couldn't go home yet. And the rest was history. That was it. And so she ended up having a conversation with my dad and coming to an acuerdo with him, like an agreement. My dad was going to financially, like, basically pay rent for me to live in her house. And then she was going to teach me everything she knew. And I remember she brought me a little bag with soap in it and a few things, and she hugged me at the end, and she just like held me, and it was like she knew, like, that was it. Like, who was this angel that had just come and was like, not only are you not just gonna like be on a list and go home, like God was like, I'm actually gonna provide you with some resources so that when you're done here, like, you can actually live a little. And it was like God knew I needed a moment to breathe. I couldn't just go back to Canada. I had fallen in love with Panama. I wanted to stay. Man, it was insane. And so a month later, I went to court. And actually what happened was my translator never showed up to court. It was my release date. My translator never showed up to court. And I was like, well, I speak Spanish. And they were like, nope. So they sent me back to prison overnight. And the next day I got out. Sunny had an entire closet full of clothes for me. She was there. We drove up to El Valle, and I remember the day I walked out of prison. Like I got my freedom. I still had to walk through the back, like, because every time I would go to court, I would walk through this back area, and I sort of knew everybody by name at the court, in court at that time, because I had gone to court so many times. And I remember like driving down that road for the last time, and it was like the most freeing feeling. It was like I understood what Viktor Frankl was talking about when he said the hardest part is not knowing when you're going home, and like that best feeling is knowing that you're done. And it was like I could finally feel what freedom felt like. And I got back to the prison. I got my stuff, not a lot because I left everything. And I remember getting into the back of that car and calling my best friend Taryn at the time. And it was like, she actually had just left a funeral for one of our very good friends. And then I was like on FaceTime with her, like, girl, I'm free. This is crazy. And going up into El Valle, which is, it looks like Fern Gully, and walking into Sunny Justice, who is like the most, that woman, if you can know that woman, you should. But the most amazing, like, artistic, this beautiful home with a pool and an outdoor shower. And she had a bedroom for me with a closet with clothes in it. And they took me for dinner, and I had filet mignon with like butter sauce and mushrooms, and I had a margarita, and we were like in this restaurant overlooking the entire valley. And it's just like, what is life? And God gives really amazing things to those who wait. And I just needed to wait. And, you know, from there, there's a whole story, but, you know, prison really was my time for reform. And we all have that in our lives where, you know, we're put in these positions of rock bottom where we have a choice. Do I grow or do I stay the same? Right? In life, you're going to lose the time. Don't waste the time. And so that was the place where God allowed me to be so that I could rediscover my purpose in life, and I could just have a minute to sit and think, and it saved me. I would never change me going to prison. I would never go back and do it again. I don't want to go back and do it again. But I would never change that. And I'm sure that if you think about a time in your life where you have faced severe adversity, maybe there's some parts of that you wouldn't change, but it all had a purpose and a meaning. If you choose to sort of like adapt, accept responsibility, accept your surroundings, and then learn and grow from the situation because it's trying to teach you something. God was trying to teach me something for a very long time. Trust that. And prison was the only place that I was going to be able to learn it. He never left my side. And so if you're still here listening to this, I just invite you to like have grace with yourself for the situations that you have been through in your life, for maybe situations that you regret. Forgiveness is going to really, really help you to move forward. And the other thing that's really, really going to help you is radical responsibility. Because at the end of the day, everything that we do happens because of the choices that we make. And we are responsible for those. So I love you guys. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to this episode. And we will see you in the next episode where we are going to start doing some really amazing and incredible interviews, because I am really so invested in understanding what it looks like to rebuild your life from scratch. I love you.